back to Psychedelics Today, everybody. Joe Moore, Kyle Buller over there. How you doing today, Kyle?
Good, man. How are you doing?
Doing pretty good. Staying busy. So first thing we want to dig into in this Friday episode is how you can help us out. And then we'll cut to the chase. So starting in September, we've got a class launching called Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists. I know many of you have heard about it before, but it's how we keep the lights on. And it's really fun. So it's an 8-week online live supported class. And we meet once a week for 8 weeks for an hour and a half. Last week is 2 hours. And there is a ton of material we work through that's pre-recorded. And essentially, it's to get you ready in your clinical practice to be ready for this coming wave of psychedelic use generally and psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. You know, we're not saying, okay, this 8-week program gets you ready to facilitate. It's more, how can you better serve your clients? There's going to be people asking questions about this. Like, my depression isn't going away. Should I try ayahuasca? And you can be more informed with how to answer that question. And, you know, be ready to help your clients when they come back from a music festival and had a bad time, or Burning Man had a bad time, or even an ayahuasca ceremony and had a bad time. Like, how do you help them with integration? Or maybe it was a really, really, really good time and they need help landing. I don't know, Kyle, what else do you think it helps people with in their clinical practice?
Yeah, those things, being able to, better serve your clients when they are bringing questions, if this is completely new to you and, you're just digging in and maybe you already are well-versed in it and, you're just looking for some community and a little bit more conversation around some of the nuances of transpersonal and exceptional experiences. So, we're providing a nice foundation framework in transpersonal somatics. We also bring a lot of our kind of philosophical backgrounds from our training in breathwork and with our teacher, Lenny Gibson. So, I think it's a little bit different at times because of that training and background. But I think it also allows us to dig into some of the nuances as well. And conversations can be very wide and depth-oriented. I love it.
Right. Like, people get a connection with colleagues that are interested in the same thing, or like, how do we help our clients with this stuff? And it's huge. Like, psychedelic therapy is here and it is available legally in a lot of states. Well, every state with ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, and then cannabis-assisted psychotherapy where legal medically or recreationally. And it's amazing. It's here. It's here now. Like, holotropic breathwork is essentially psychedelic psychotherapy in a different container. It's obviously not exactly therapy. It's more self-development and coaching and stuff like that. But you can look at it in a lot of similar ways. So that's kind of what we're up to. And you can learn more at psychedeliceducationcenter.com. And again, like, some people were worried about losing their license for getting education. I don't believe that's possible. You're trying to help your clients. This is a new trend in drug use. It's a new trend in America. LSD use is up 30 to 60% from last year just because of COVID. So that's pretty intense. Imagine what's happening with other drugs. So this is essentially required information for you to help your clients who are interested in this or doing this stuff. I hear endlessly, like, I can't find a therapist who knows anything about this. And you could be that therapist for somebody.
Or even getting the training to help educate some of your colleagues too, right? Because I think, more people are starting to become interested in this and get ahead of it, get educated.
Right. Yeah. And think about the ketamine clinics who don't necessarily pair it with therapy. You're giving somebody a really intense transpersonal or scary experience. And do you have the training to help them work with that? Like, maybe you've done it a couple hundred times, and people tend to be, fine. But, there's people here and there that need extra support, and you could make your business that much better by having this kind of education. So cool. I think we're good on that one. So yeah, again, psychedeliceducationcenter.com. Cool. I guess let's dig in. What article do you want to start with? Some big news recently.
Yeah, let's dig in with that. So, if you haven't heard already, there was a nice news release that was announced by Dr. Julie Holland about the release of William Leonard Pickard, which was really exciting to hear. about. And so I know there was a few organizations that covered this. And so who knows, maybe you've already heard about this. So if not, well, here, you're hearing it here. But yeah, just really awesome to hear that. If you don't know anything about William's background, really interesting story. And it does seem like there's digging into the story. It seems like there's a lot of different little narratives going on. So I really suggest people to check that out on your own if you're interested. Earwid has a nice vault and has a lot of different links and information. You can dig into that. But essentially, William Leonard Pickard was arrested in 2000 with his partner, Clyde Apperson. And William ended up serving 2 life sentences, and his partner Clyde got 30 years. And there's a lot of controversy around the arrest here. So I don't know if anybody's seen Hamilton Morris's video on Vice about the missile silo. So this is what this is referring to, this underground LSD missile silo lab that was owned by another guy, Gordon Todd Skinner. And so, yeah, it sounded like, Skinner set up Pickard and ended up, I guess, some people are saying like, the government kind of just making Pickard as an example. I mean, he did have 2 other offenses, I believe. He was arrested in the past, so I believe that's why he got the 2 life sentences. He already had some prior offenses. But just, I guess, really interesting story in drug history, psychedelic history. So it's awesome that he was released compassionately due to COVID and health reasons. You can check out the court document. He was trying to get an early release for lots of different types of, reasons, from helping out and having a positive influence in trying to predict the fentanyl and carfentanil crisis, which he wrote about, I think, in the late 90s. So he predicted this a while ago, which I found to be really, really interesting. But the court didn't really take that up. Looking at what his other record was, it was, I forget what the words that they used. It's beneficial information, but not worthy enough to have a early release because of the crimes that he committed. But it's really interesting because when the DEA ended up raiding the lab, they didn't find any evidence of LSD actually being manufactured there. So
that's a little creepy.
Mm-hmm.
So from what you've read, there was no LSD there. And did they work that through the system?
Oh man. Yeah.
Is there anything there? Was it like testimony or?
So it sounded like Skinner was working with the DEA and had some immunity, set him up. They were going into, it sounded like from one report that Pickard wanted to dismantle the lab and didn't feel so hot about Skinner because he just saw some of his reckless behavior. And I think they said that they caught him with some precursors to LSD, but they weren't actually manufacturing LSD at the lab. And then you could get into this whole other kind of narrative around John Halpern, and there's some stuff around the Halperngate. That was an article written by John Hanna. And you can find that on Earwid as well. But just saying, like, Halpern might have had some sort of role in that as well, being some sort of informant. I forget what the phrasing that they used. A cooperating witness, I believe, was what they used for the DEA. And if anybody doesn't know who Halpern is, he's a physician, was at Harvard, and has done a lot of psychedelic research. He was part of some of Rick Strassman's work and did some stuff with peyote and the Native American Church. So I don't know. There's a lot of information out there. And I remember reading through this years ago. And now since this happened, I'm starting to try to dig back into it. So, I'm trying to put all the pieces together, and it's all still feels new to me again to try to revisit all this and piece it all together. I don't know. Did you ever stumble across this piece of history, psychedelic history?
Right. So Halperngate was a big deal when it went down, obviously. Like, I was what, probably 2007, 2008, maybe even 2006. I was just spending loads of time on the internet reading everything I could about psychedelics. And this came up for me. I was like, John Halpern, though, I thought he did a lot of really great stuff. And I'm like, I don't know what to make of that. And, I think how I've landed is that people, not everybody's, willing to go to jail. Like, people will fold. If you get pressure from the government, it's easy to fold. Like, it's better to think you're not going to, perhaps. But, it's not so hard to have to give them the information they want. We would want to think we'd need to be tortured for it, but you might not need to be.
Right. And I think this is what the article Halperngate, I think it was in here, just saying John could have lost his license doing, and even knowing some of these people doing psychedelic research, maybe he was, approached by the DEA to gather information, and standing at Harvard, so he had a lot of great things going. So do you cooperate or do you not? I don't know. But again, I would really encourage people to look into this really interesting piece of history.
It's good history, right? You're doing this stuff right now. There's a good chance at least a couple of you are involved in some stuff that, you could get in trouble for. And if you bring in people with licenses or people that have families, it's really easy to manipulate folks to fold and roll. So I think the lesson for me is just keep the cards really close to your chest and carefully consider if you should even mention anything. I have people regularly tell me they're manufacturers. I'm like, please don't tell me. Please don't tell me, especially where you are or even your real name. Yeah. So it's a creepy thing, but people can go to jail for 20 plus years. Easy. Pickard got 2 life sentences, you said?
2. Yep.
That's so fucked up. So, even 5 years is too much for most folks. Even 1 year is too much for most folks. So, consider what you're doing, how much risk you're in, how long away you might be going away for. And that's kind of why you and I have to be really careful with emails. People will email us saying, where's the most, can you give me a list of psychedelic facilitators close to Boston? It's no. Or Center is doing this work. It's this work isn't really explicitly legal yet, except in ketamine and cannabis contexts. So that's why we're careful. And we think you should probably be careful too. We don't want anybody going to jail for this stuff, even though we all know that the benefit is so huge for a lot of folks. It's just not worth going to prison. You can help a lot more people when you're not in jail. But yeah, this whole story was fascinating. The missile silo thing was holy shit. I would love to have that facility. And it's tough because you said he was friends with Julie Holland at one point, or colleagues with Julie Holland. Julie Holland even wrote letters to Obama or petitioned Obama to get him out.
That's what was reported at Lucid News. So it said Holland has known Pickard since 1994, referred to him as a colleague in letters to President Obama and Judge J. Thompson Martin, advocating for his release. So, yeah. And after the arrest, the DEA claimed that LSD availability in the United States was reduced by 95% through Pickard, but he denied that assertion.
Yeah. So tricky out there. And, tangentially related to this is this whole idea of snitching or folding or whatever. It's a really big topic in the psychedelic world. In this world, one of the worst things you can be is a snitch. And to who? And to what extent, right? What if somebody's an active sexual assault type? They're actively hurting people on the regular and they're involved with, psychedelics. How do you solve that? Do you go to the police? Do you confront the person themselves? Do you do blackmail on them? I don't know. Because there's no regulation here, it's the Wild West, and people are getting a lot of esteem. And one thing I've noticed is that people seem to get cut. You've got a problem with the way I'm doing this, you're out. And it's this family they've essentially been adopted into, and they're excommunicated and no longer having access to their drugs, their religion, quote unquote, and their family and friends. It's kind of just similar to how LDS and Scientology can kind of like cut folks out once in a while. It's really tragic. And it's because someone chooses to do kind of nasty stuff and someone wants to take a stand. At what point should law enforcement get involved? At what point shouldn't they? And does that person have blackmail on other folks? And that's why they're not getting outed. Some weird shit. Have you run into like these kinds of ideas or thought about this kind of stuff?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. It's weird. It happens all over, right? Like I know about it out in the West. I don't really know about it in the East. But it's really uncomfortable to me. I heard about another ayahuasca group that operates out in the West, and the leader and his wife split up, and the leader was immediately sleeping with multiple of the women in the group. Like as soon as they split up. It's like, oh God, like you're in this kind of religious leader position and you're going to sleep with your flock. It's like, great, I guess. But like those people are vulnerable to you. And it's not, in my opinion, very ethical. If that's the way you want to treat, your people, that's fine, I guess. But they should know before they get involved that that's the kind of thing that can happen here. Because you were married, it didn't seem obvious. Yeah. So I don't know. This is something that bothers me a lot. I don't really know what to do about it. Like I've talked to you a few times about this. Like I was so bent out of shape last summer into the fall. And like, people send us stuff and like tell us things. And I'm like, great, but I can't necessarily do that. Like I could get sued for libel or like all these other things. And I don't have enough data to really even run it by a lawyer.
Right. And I think like, yeah, how much is it true? Like, are people just like telling you things to tell you things, or is there some validity to it?
Right. And if I've talked to a lot of leaders in the space, including elders, female elders, and there's, not very much great conclusions I've landed on. Yeah. Even with their help. So, food for thought. Like even folks at MAPS have been getting busted, like Richard Jensen is a great example. So like watch that. And there's plenty of other examples, I'm sure, that just haven't come out yet. Yeah. So before we jump from Halperngate, was there anything else you wanted to kind of mention from your reading that might be interesting or important to know?
Yeah, I'm just really encouraging people to dig into it. Like when I saw the news from Julie Holland, and then I saw Symposia, Nashe Deveneaux post a video about it. I knew a little bit about William Pickard's background. And so, it got me excited. I was like, oh, wow, here's somebody that was arrested for LSD manufacturing. And I know he was kind of like set up, and there was a whole kind of controversy around it. And, just really awesome to see him get released. And should people be going to jail when maybe they're trying to help, or when they're set up? I mean, I think that's the main thing, right? Like this possible setup. And so, when I started digging into it, some stories are just really revolving around like set up through Todd Skinner, and then start digging into it a little more. And then there's this whole Halperngate thing. And then like, what type of role could he have played in setting up and being informant? So, I'm still trying to piece all these little puzzle pieces together, because this is still relatively new in my investigation, just because like I stumbled across it a few years ago and just haven't really thought about it too much since. And so as it's starting to reemerge, like, yeah, it's interesting. It does seem like there's all sorts of like interesting narratives that are going on. So I would just really encourage people to just dig in and, learn about it yourself.
Yeah, totally. Like these issues are wildly complex. There's a lot of details. We're going to miss stuff when we talk about it. So educate yourself. This is definitely a case and individuals that are worth knowing about for sure. Cool.
Yeah, because I mean, if people have been following MAPS, like John Halpern has definitely been caught up in some MAPS drama as well in the past. I mean, there's a video of somebody, I forget the person's, McLeod, confronted Rick and Halpern at a conference, I think it was in 2006, bringing this whole case up. And seeing that footage was really interesting back in 2006 of this conversation with, this group of people and Halpern and Rick. And so, yeah, it's just really interesting. I really encourage people to kind of do some research on it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's hard here, maybe hard to say this, but I'll just say it. But like a lot of us do illegal things. And even if you're a federally licensed researcher or a doctor, and maybe you hold some sort of really fancy DEA license, like people are still breaking the law. That's why a lot of these folks are saying, I'm not ever going to say publicly if I used or not. Like a lot of the top researchers say that, doesn't matter. Like, I don't need to know if somebody at a university has done it or not. I know that they're doing probably very rigorous research. I at times wish I knew, but I understand why they can't say it. Yeah, cool. You want to move on to one of these next articles here?
Sure.
A gentleman in Denver was just sentenced to up to 20 years in federal prison, I think, for growing mushrooms. This is the case where this person was on Vice and a few other media outlets showing grows. So look at my mushroom grow. And he would, give, unfortunately, too many personal details and wasn't wearing discreet enough clothing. They would blur his face, but that wasn't enough. So the feds were able to track him down and they got him. I think the arrest was many months ago. It might have been maybe even late last year. So we were like, why isn't he getting sentenced? He's not even in police custody or anything. So he was like, I was thinking they were just going to let it go. But
I did too.
Just last week, I think it was Friday or Saturday last week, July, he got sentenced to up to 20 years for possession and manufacture, I believe. And there's this Denver newspaper called West and Word, W-O-R-D. And you can find the article. It came out the 25th of July. Gentleman's name is Kole Milner. Yeah, he got one count of possession with intent to distribute psilocybin. Yeah. The funny thing about this article is, just because they say it weird, the charging of Milner restarts a long dormant case that began when DEA agents searched Milner's Denver apartment in September of 2019 and left with 906 live psychedelic mushrooms. It's weird phrasing. And 20.42 ounces of dried mushrooms. That's a lot. Just call it 20 ounces plus a bunch of wet mushrooms. And it's really rough.
A little over a pound.
Right. There's a thing here. It suggests he was making about $2,000 a month. So if you're doing this stuff, realize the risks. There's a great benefit to it, but realize that there's risks, even in a place like Denver where mushrooms specifically are decriminalized. Again, only at the city level. Yeah. Any thoughts on this one, Kyle?
When that first got released, it was really making me think about the importance of the language around decriminalization and really trying to educate people what that actually means. Because I don't know how many times I've gotten, I hear, cultivation, possession is now legal in Colorado. And it's well, first of all, it's just Denver, right? Not all of Colorado. And it's not legal. It's decriminalized. So the feds could still come in and arrest you. And I think this is a prime example. Again, even though it feels like the laws are changing, they could still come in and make an example of you. And I think even kind of coming back to Pickard's case, trying to make an example of an LSD manufacturer when, to some extent, on some of the reports that I was reading, that this person wasn't trying to do that. He just saw this guy, Todd, who just seemed totally irresponsible. And he was just trying to, dismantle some of the lab. So this person wasn't able to, manipulate people and just administer drugs to a bunch of young folks and go around the country. So was Pickard trying to do the right thing there of kind of playing along, seeing that this person was kind of dangerous and how do I possibly stop this person? And then it just kind of, he ended up taking the fall. And just so thinking about this person in Denver showing their grow up to a news channel because all of a sudden mushrooms are decriminalized, that's a risky thing to do, I feel like, right? It's just because it's decriminalized, it does not mean that the feds, if you're flaunting that, they'll make an example of you and show you that, it's decriminalized, but we still have jurisdiction and we can still come in and press some charges on you. So I mean, I hope that person doesn't end up serving 20 years. That would suck.
Right. Like one of my hopes is that so with legalization in Colorado, we still have people in prison for cannabis offenses. They're, I think, slowly coming out, but they're still in prison. And we still have that in a lot of places across the country, right? Like even during this weird COVID time, people are still in jail for something that's now legal. So I'm hoping that in a few years, as decriminalization moves forward, as we're hopefully moving towards some sort of legalization, a lot of these political prisoners of sorts can get out of jail.
Mm-hmm.
I hope. Yeah. What would that do to the prison burden if all nonviolent drug offenders got released?
Right.
It would make us look a lot better than we do now in the eyes of the world, for one. Yeah.
And it comes back to this like notion, kind of like what you say, like there's a lot of nonviolent drug offenders in for selling marijuana, but it's okay for once it is legal, businesses can come in and do the same thing. And so, I could see some people on the one side being like, well, this person was selling psilocybin mushrooms, like distribution and selling. Well, what's going to be the difference when companies spin up to sell mushrooms? Whether that's selling to a clinic that provides therapy. I know there's other companies that are looking at other avenues. I know there's a company in, I think, Denver, right? They're like exploring psilocybin coffee, I think.
I feel like they were joking. But yeah.
Well,
it's a great PR spin at the very least.
Yeah.
Yeah, but good for them. They, right around the same time as decrim happened, they started making all these press releases. I'm like, yeah, cool, but you can still go to jail and your bank accounts can get shut down. That's not something the state or town can control,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But it just makes me think about like the perception of like underground producers and distributors versus above ground. And what is that all about? So big businesses can come in and sell cannabis, but we still have lots of people of color and probably white people too, locked up in prison for doing that when it was illegal.
Right. Exactly.
Kind of messed up.
Yeah, it's a big deal. It's a really big deal. So, yeah, I think that's it on that one. Again, be careful out there. Don't just assume the drug laws. Confirm things. Maybe even talk to a lawyer. Like, we're not attorneys, but you should probably have one if you're playing in this space. Thankfully, we finally got one. And I feel a little less scared, but I'm not feeling like total immunity or anything. But, it's still creepy being in this space. And we should respect that. Like, regardless of who you are, there's still very serious risks here. If you get really deep in it. If you're like a really straight-laced therapist doing integration work, no worries. If you're providing underground work, that's when stuff starts to get really slippy, even if people are providing their own drugs. So, just things to really think about.
Mm-hmm.
Be careful. Careful. We don't want anybody getting hurt physically or, imprisoned, catching hep, all that kind of stuff.
There was a really great panel that I was a host for the Chacruna Liberty Summit, Psychedelic Liberty Summit. And I forget the person's name, but he was a lawyer and he was discussing like the law around psychedelics and psychedelic integration. What does it mean for therapists? And I remember just seeing like some of the situations that he threw out there. A lot of people in the chat were like, this is terrifying. And could you get wrapped up in conspiracy, right? If you were working with somebody and you semi-referred them to go to an underground person and something happened and, you kind of were part of that plan. And so there's a lot of things to think about that I think that we're not thinking about. And this is something that comes up often in our online course when we talk about these type of topics. People are like, "Ooh, I didn't think about any of this stuff." Mm-hmm. So I think it is important to talk about and things that we may necessarily not be thinking about.
Yeah. So please do. Like, I have to say that walking around Denver with mushrooms in your pocket is a lot less stressful than it used to be, but it's still a situation. And, the local initiatives are amazing. I consider them, great first steps, but it's just a start in our fight against the drug war. Mm-hmm. A drug war that is responsible in large part for mass incarceration of people of color. And, this is just a really big topic. I just finished the new Jim Crow recently, discusses the drug war, mass incarceration of people of color, and just how the systems, by the numbers, are explicitly stacked against people of color. It's crazy. It's like, as long as you don't say, I'm giving you this sentence because you're black, you can kind of get away with it in court. They're working against that. But, that's how bad it is and how active it is. It's really ugly. So I suggest folks that are interested in the drug war and just the sentencing disparities between white and black people, you should check this book out. And it really gives great statistical analysis, numbers, all that. And it gives you a really good understanding of really how ugly stuff is and why people have it so bad and how the drug war plays a big part in that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The drug war has claimed many
topic.
lives.
Yeah, and ruined many more. It's ugly. Yeah, I put a question on the Facebook group yesterday or 2 days ago, maybe. It's like, hey, what do you think? Decrim or legalization? And it actually got a lot of great discussion going. I found a lot of new points. Yeah, like it's a false dichotomy to just say decriminalization versus legalization. And, as we say, decriminalization doesn't necessarily mean anything. Like It can mean something for a municipality or a county or a state, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's the case for the feds.
Right.
And as soon as you're crossing like state lines, that's kind of when they can be really into it. But, realistically, DEA seems to have plenty of power to do whatever they want. But okay, so there's different kinds of legalization beyond the different kinds of decriminalization. So Paul Antico, who's really involved in, I think, the California decriminalization movement, says like, okay, what kind of legalization? Legal like an apple? Legal like cigarettes, alcohol, like a pilot's license, driver's license? Like where is the line? Or is it legal like OxyContin is legal?
Right, very controlled.
Prescription, very controlled. You're getting deep shit if you have it. And like there's even different levels, like cocaine. Like you can't really have personally prescribed cocaine, but they can use it in a hospital setting as like a topical anesthetic or something, right? So like there's a lot here. And like what legalization, like the reason I want some sort of legal framework is that for the same reason we keep talking about like for the vaccine, like how many people, what kind of trials do you want for this COVID vaccine before you take it? Or like what kind of facility, what kind of requirements should the facility have that's making the MDMA or LSD or whatever you're buying? What kind of like framework should they be operating in before you want to buy from them? And there's no way to really know right now. I kind of make this, I remember a few years ago, started making this comment. It's like, oh, cool. So you want it to stay illegal so that you can have your heady farm to table LSD. And it's like, it's not, cute, but that's not really how it works. And there's plenty of people getting hurt as a result of not having these controls in place. And I had a little bit of a discussion with Riley Capps, a journalist for The Rooster in Boulder, about like decrim versus legalization. He's like, well, no, that's not a problem because the labs will have some sort of like eBay or Amazon type review system, rating system. So you can tell, but it's like, well, it just takes like a couple high schoolers whipping up a shitty lab or, non-safety oriented people just trying to make a quick buck to get a few people hurt. It's like, well, I want to be a libertarian, but I don't necessarily trust people's motives enough to fully be a libertarian. Like, I feel like there needs to be incentive structures in place and regulation in place for a lot of things. Like the environmental angle is a big reason why I'm not. Like they just externalize their costs and it's passed on to everybody else. Like the markets don't really regulate disaster. So yeah, I don't know. It's a big topic, but it's something that I think we should have some sort of like, those TV shows when the 8 talking heads yell at each other for like 30 minutes. I feel like we should do that around decriminalization. Yeah. It's a big topic. There's a lot to unpack, and culture needs to come a ways before we really do legalization. But I think there's no real great argument to be made for keeping the DEA like drug scheduling system in place the way it is. It's racist. It's harmful. Doesn't help anybody. Yeah. Like Portugal being the model for what things could look like in short order, and then we can get better from there.
Yeah. So I guess I don't know. I feel like maybe we should stay on this topic. I know the other link that you had up was actually just based around decriminalization. Al Jazeera just hosted a panel on that. So, I mean, what would like a Portugal model, is that like a good first step, is to decriminalize and then be able to build out these systems? Or do you push for legalization first and kind of like what MAPS and some of these other folks are doing for medicalization? Or I don't know, like what is a good first step here?
This has to be a phased approach. I can't see legalization happening within the next 3 years, but I could see decriminalization happening at the federal level. It's kind of a pipe dream, but I can see it happening.
Mm-hmm.
Given the financial crunch we're going to be in on account of like the paper money printing machines just going, and COVID like really triggering some sort of depression. Yeah. Like I could see us being in a real money crunch and really needing things to change a little bit.
Mm.
So I would say like a decriminalization thing first, like getting rid of the DEA scheduling framework, really abolishing the DEA. Hopefully, the FDA could absorb their kind of like research licenses and whatnot that researchers need. And then, the decriminalization thing and using some of those dollars for the treatment programs and like the kind of courts that Portugal has. Like, do you want treatment? Yes or no? Cool. Here's your treatment. Versus like, let's go to jail for 20, 30 years. Yeah. So that's kind of my hope. And, once we get there, we can have like a larger cultural conversation of how do we help keep things safe for everybody long term. Yeah. I don't know. Do you see like any issues with any of that? Or like, to me, it seems logical, but perhaps there's reasons. One good point that Riley had, though, was like, we shouldn't let corporate people get involved here, because once it's legal, they're going to have profit incentive to like push people to do more psychedelics. And I was like,
That's interesting.
For a long time, there was advertising rules in place where liquor manufacturers couldn't advertise in certain channels. So like you could theoretically put regulation on advertisement, which I think would be fine. Like if there were consequences for trying to push people to do mushrooms every day, like it's something we can handle with regulation. We've done it before. Mm-hmm. It's not prohibition. It's prohibition on advertising to promote the use. Like, perhaps what we're doing could be considered advertising, but we're not manufacturing or receiving money from mushroom companies, really. So we might be clear.
What's the advertising like in Colorado for cannabis?
Oh, it's hilarious. It's everywhere. Billboards. It's not like explicit. It's not like, people using dab rigs and whatnot on billboards, but we're starting to see it on the radio. We have billboards. I think I've seen a couple TV ads, but the regulation really isn't that bad. I think it's just like, don't show people smoking on screen. But I can't really speak directly to that. But I think other states have different kinds of regulations, right? Like I don't recall ads in Massachusetts yet, where it's recreationally legal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's interesting.
So, it's an interesting thing to think about, right? It's like, does that help to promote the use of a substance if you constantly see ads and it's so normalized like that versus not being able to advertise about it, but knowing that it's there and being, I guess, maybe a little bit more scientific with it about having like the benefits, the risks, and being really honest and saying, these substances are here, they're accessible, but not turning them into some sort of commodity where, your business model revolves around needing consumers to keep that going. I don't know.
It's tough. Like whenever we see that word commodity, I'm always like, okay, it's like wheat. Like wheat is just one thing. And there's different grades of wheat. And at a certain point, you're incentivized to grow less wheat and produce less wheat because there's a glut in the market and the price isn't enough. That's how I see commodity. And I could see mushrooms being treated that way. Like there's like a NASDAQ index on mushroom prices or something. And then, that's how I see commodity.
Yeah.
Well, the common use is when we're going away from the sacred. Mm-hmm. Like there is a commodity on mushrooms. Like there's a cap on what people will regularly spend on mushrooms.
Right.
There's a cap on what people will spend on MDMA or LSD. Like people aren't spending $30 a hit on LSD. People aren't spending $500 a gram on MDMA, hopefully. You know, if it was amazing, I would consider it, but it's probably not what I'm going to be spending my money on. But, you know, it's already commodity priced in a lot of ways. Like the price accounts for legal risks. It accounts for a lot of things. So I don't know. Like when we talk commodification, I get a little kind of weirded out because I don't know what to do with that because I already see it as a commodity of sorts. It's just a black market commodity versus a normal market community or commodity.
Right.
Manufacturers will want to maximize profit. That's what businesses do.
Mm-hmm.
So they will want to kind of push more people to buy it more regularly. Yeah. But, you know, like, what's the downside here? People will hopefully be using less alcohol, like, which is a great thing. Like, it's clearly one of the worst things for us, hopefully. And, you know, I just finished reading this history of bourbon. And it was really interesting because this guy's a historian of food. He even referenced psychedelics a few times. But he's like, there's just constantly changing trends in the marketplace of like who wants what.
Right.
Like, am I really okay spending $150 for this bottle of bourbon? Like, what about that White Claw? You know, like, why do I care about craft beers anymore when I could be buying White Claw? So I think we're going to like just, you know, markets evolve and change. Markets aren't necessarily wrong. Markets could be designed poorly, but, you know, consumer trends change over time. People need more education, like, and hopefully there's just more choice, you know, like I don't really see why we should restrict each other's behavior. So I'm kind of like on this cognitive liberty front too. And I'm okay with good chemists making good drugs or good growers growing good plants, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, you know, I think I'm just thinking about people that might view it that way of like, oh, should we be advertising about this stuff? Do we want, like, you know, thinking about teenagers, just, you know, you constantly see ads about get your psilocybin mushrooms. But I mean, how many ads are you seeing right now about alcohol? How many ads do you see about pharmaceuticals? And I think for me, it's like, how do we come back and view that these are all substances and they all have different effects and we're being advertised to already? I mean, I literally hate watching TV because like 1 in every like 3 ads seems like a pharmaceutical advertisement, right? And so it's like, well, it's already happening, right? But it's kind of based on quote unquote their drugs, right? As other people, like maybe Terrence McKenna or something.
My drugs are better than your drugs. Like the fact that we don't even talk about PCP is insane to me. And it's not one of this culture's drugs. Therefore, people should go to jail for it. Mm-hmm. When it's super similar to ketamine, has a lot of really interesting properties. We should be talking about it, you know? Yeah. We're totally being advertised to. Like, are you out of your Cialis? Are you out of your Viagra? Oh, your 8-year-old's not on Adderall anymore? Bummer. Like, let's get a refill in there.
Yeah.
Or, oh, Adderall didn't work. Let's try Lexapro for your child. It's like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, and then it's not okay to like talk about recreational or spiritual or drugs that can be used recreationally, celebratory, spiritually, etc. Like, insane. Especially drugs that are less harmful than alcohol, which is everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this is kind of where my libertarian bent comes in, but I understand that the market needs to be really regulated.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't really understand if we should have this kind of like driver's license model. Like, I don't really like the idea of, like, I kind of like it, but I also kind of don't like it. I don't necessarily want people to have to like go through some government sanctioned training.
Right.
Because who's to say the government sanctioned training is good? Like, a lot of organizations do bad things.
Yeah, what would it be like going through a driver's license program for alcohol, right? It's like, I mean, people do some really dumb shit drunk, right?
If you're 16, you know, and you get your alcohol training, like, that's going to probably help a lot. like let's show 16-year-olds a lot of injuries from alcohol. Like, what does hospitalization look like? What does getting your stomach pumped look like? How do you avoid it, you know? Like, how do you take the sex appeal away from something that's prohibited? And it's showing the ugly truth. And that's part of education. Like, when I did scuba training, they're like, here's what the bends looks like. Here's why you want to follow all the rules. this is what suffocation underwater looks like. It's not pretty. Like, here's the rules you follow.
Couldn't you argue that Dare has tried to do that? Somebody, I think on
well, they tried to scare you straight,
Right.
more so than like give you factual information. So Dare, like, I think changed their attitude recently, and they started becoming more factually based, which is weird that it took like a big revolution to do that. But yeah, I don't know. So yeah, in essence, you're right, but it's like, what? I don't know. It needs to be done from not police officers. I think really social workers or psychologists or something should be going into schools and not cops. Like, cops are there to like give you the fear, like, oh, you can go to prison too. It's like, well, that's only because there's fucked up fake drug laws. Not fake, they're very real, I guess, but inappropriately enforced drug laws that are making those cops arrest children and putting them in jail, or people of color or whoever.
Forget who it was, but somebody made a post on Facebook and they're like, were you part of the DARE program? And what do you remember? And I laughed because the only thing I remember was like the concept of LSD was just so mysterious to me. I was like, this mysterious chemical on stamps and blotter. I mean, that's what I thought. I'm like, oh, stamps. And how could, I thought it was the craziest thing ever. And I don't know, really interesting to think back and how interested I was about that molecule. But also the police officer literally just told stories of like, you know, this is why you don't do this. We're going to come arrest you. Like, I've already had DARE graduates that I've already busted for smoking marijuana, and like, we've already arrested them. And, you know, I've seen these really good kids just like turn their life into shit. And, you know, so, and I remember them threatening us, if you do this, we will come and arrest you. And it's like, whoa, like, what if like you had somebody that was like, hey, like, here's something like psilocybin mushrooms. These were originally used in ceremonial contexts. They had, you know, these kind of safety mechanisms built in place. And this is like kind of what's going on. Here are the risks and dangers. This is why you would want to do it in a situation like this. People are using it to find spiritual growth. And I don't know, is that more enticing to people? Be like, oh yeah, I'm really curious. But at least like when they would practice, hopefully they'd be like, oh yeah, remember they told us to like do it in this context, instead of being like, this is an illegal thing, we're going to get arrested, so let's hide and do it in secrecy and not tell anybody about it, because the police chief is going to kick down my door and arrest me and tell me I'm a bad person. Like, that's all I remember from DARE class. It was just like pretty ridiculous.
I remember one guy going, can you smoke beer? I thought that was funny in 7th grade. And then another person came in, and actually it was one of these guys that, like, you know, you get in trouble, and part of like lessening your sentences, you go talk to middle schoolers about what you got arrested for.
Right.
Never do LSD. It's the worst thing in the world you can do. It'll ruin your life. It'll, you know, it sticks with you forever because your spine bleeds and blah, 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 you know, lies. And I remember the police kind of telling me the same thing like the year before. And it's just unbelievable. Like, yeah, I was fascinated by the stories, but I'm also like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, pairing this with like the fear of prison. You know, I get it. Yes. Like, but let's just be fact-based. Like, okay, here's the laws. Here's where it comes from. Here's the history. Here's the pluses and minuses, and then here's the legal consequences at this point in time. You know, like, I would just like the facts, you know, like, I don't need to be manipulated, because that's all I felt like it was a manipulation of the truth and manipulation of us. And this is not science-based policy. And I think a lot of us now want science-based policy. And, you know, look at the math. Let's look at, like, do the laws work? No. They don't work. All right. What do we want to do? Like, what do we want? What's the end result? We want happy, healthy, productive people, you know, having happy lives and making amazing things. Yeah. And doing amazing things. You know, we don't want people locked in jail for 40 years. But Cheney and his buddies own all these private prisons, and they don't want stuff to change. So we have a resistance factor that is a solid block, like prison guard unions, police unions, stuff like that, wants drug policy to stay in place so more of these people can have more jobs, and more stability.
Yeah, that was one thing. I think it was in Shay Deveneaux's recent video that she did about the William Pickard case. And I think it was one thing that he wrote in his book, just how devastating and how terrible nonviolent offenders, how you can just rot in prison and how it's almost like the most evil thing ever. When you really think about it, it's like, yeah, somebody that's just trying to maybe explore their mind, understand their relationship to the universe, trying to maybe heal some past traumas, maybe to have fun and see some new things, and being in there with people that have committed some serious crimes. I don't know. It makes me scratch my head and go, yeah, what are we doing here? Why are police so concerned about that? Like maybe that should be in the realm of medicine and mental health professionals, and instead of just locking people up for having a substance. It's
right. It's not really logical if we want society to function well.
Yeah.
Like if we want to appropriately spend tax dollars, prison for nonviolent offenses isn't it? It hasn't worked ever, never will work. And it doesn't make sense to continue something like that. Perhaps what's going on is the sunk cost fallacy. Like if people just keep throwing money at something, even though it's proven wrong, but it's easy to get votes that way.
Yeah.
Like, okay, cool. You're hard on drugs. You're tough on crime. Great. Yeah, I'll vote for you because crime is apparently a really big issue. In some places it is.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, let's figure this out. Let's do better. Understand that there's this huge block, prison guard unions, police unions, and people that own the prisons are going to be together on the other side of this fight for the drug war. And we're kind of over here like pissing in each other's Fruit Loops about like decriminalization or legalization. It's like, well, fuck, like let's calm down. Let's understand that this is a staged approach, and we can fight that battle about legalization and what kind of legalization if we choose to, once we get the feds off our back, and world police off our back. Yeah, I just heard that one the other day from my neighbor who's from Louisiana. It killed me when he said it. Yeah, so it's going to be a long battle. I think there's a lot of room for improvement with how we interact with each other. Like I kind of just stopped paying attention to the decriminalized movement because a lot of people were being assholes to me and not having rational conversation. And I'm like, well, let's just calm down, do it one thing at a time, and come up with a consensus that we want to go forward with. And we can diverge when we want to diverge, because the other side is very well funded and we're not. So right might be on our side, but it still takes organization, office space, like whiteboards, printers, all that.
Yeah.
To really make this happen. Like IP34 in Oregon is like the amount of work those guys put in is crazy. And that's just one state.
Right.
So if we have to do this at the federal level, it's going to be a lot. It's going to probably have to be a coalition of a lot of organizations, and hopefully they can pull it off.
Yep. Yeah, this is a very nuanced conversation, and just thinking about that panel with on Al Jazeera is like, they asked for like a 30 to 45 second clip, and I was like, how do you talk about decriminalization in 30 seconds? Because there's so many of these moving parts, and I mean, the one thing that I just presented was, when it comes down to it, support cognitive liberty, and why are people going to jail for that? And I think that's my main argument about all of that. It's like, why would we arrest people for exploring themselves?
Exactly. There's no good reason. Cool. So we're at an hour. So I guess we can circle back to navigating psychedelics real quick. So we've added an independent learner package. Like if folks can't make the live classes, we've made an option available where people can study at their own pace. They still get all the same material except for the live sessions. So you can check that out. It's a few $100s cheaper than the normal package. So you do save a little bit there. I think we still send you books. So with the class, you do get copies of the trip journal that we've put out and the integration workbook. We mail those out. So those are a great bonus. Can you talk about those books, Kyle? Like, what do you think are like the last class we actually had? People talked a lot about how they use the integration workbook and the trip journal to really boost some sessions they had.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so broke it up into 2 books. There's a trip journal. It goes over some basic harm reduction safety in the beginning. And then it just contains a lot of different journaling prompts, like what's your intention, what's your relationship to the plant and substance, just things to really get you thinking about why you're about to partake in a psychedelic journey. And then there are sections for writing during that space. There's some mandalas in there, a space where a circle you could draw afterwards. There's just a lot of different journaling activities, and just really thinking about trying to prep you for the journey itself. And so I think there's 3 or 4 journey slots. So, you can track things. There's a checklist. So, you remember what you want to bring with you. And then the integration workbook is similar. It's a lot of different journal prompts. I kind of follow this approach of inner work, including dreams. There's an analogy of bringing your insight down, and it's a seed, and how do you start to water it and really care for what happened during that experience, and to put a lot of intention and work into it. So, to make those changes, it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of conscious effort to move things forward. So I use a lot of garden analogies there. So yeah, check it out. I think it's a great tool, and people seem to really enjoy it as well.
And some of our past students even are interested in bulk orders for their clinics, and working with their clients with this stuff. So we're seeing actually people transition almost their whole business to integration work, and our class can really help with that. And these books can also really help a ton. So I'd say at the very least, check out the books. You can find them right on psychedelicstoday.shop.com. And if you want a hard copy, there's links there, but the digital copies are about $10. The hard copies are about 20, I think.
Yeah.
So
they're on Amazon.
Check it out. But those come with the class, both digital and print. And again, we run through our standard course, which is essentially everything you need to know about the history to get started and the science to get started, harm reduction, how to do festivals appropriately, how to vet your psychedelic retreat center, all that kind of stuff. And then we transition in weeks 5 through 8 over to more clinically focused topics, like what does ketamine-assisted psychotherapy look like? And plenty of other topics that are clinically focused.
Mm-hmm.
So again, we start that in September 17 for our 2 different rounds. So we've got one at 2:00 Eastern, and then 2:30, or what are the time slots again?
2 p.m. Eastern and 7 p.m. Last week I thought it was 7:30, but 7 p.m.
Yeah. So you can learn more about it at psychedeliceducationcenter.com, and we are happy to answer questions if you have any psychedelic. Or what's the email? Psychedelicstoday email@gmail.com, or there's contact forms on our website at psychedelicstoday.com.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. I think that's it, Kyle.
Yeah,
great
thanks,
episode.
Joe. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you all for tuning in, and we will see you on our next episode on Tuesday. Have a great weekend, everybody. Bye-bye.